Hello, I want to welcome you to The Power of Our Story. On Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we will have a weekly storytelling evening where each one of our 29 authors of our book, Wounds to Wisdom Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives, will read their story from the book. Our collaborative effort is a labor of love from all of us to those protectors who may be suffering in silence. All are welcome. Tonight, I want to welcome retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Duncan. So, a little bit about Scott. Scott Duncan is a retired lieutenant colonel, served in the Marine Corps for 21 years as a logistician. He commanded at the company and battalion levels and served in combat operations in Iraq. Scott entered the veteran space upon transitioning from military service in 2012. He directed and co-founded two nonprofits focused on recruiting, training, and placing veterans into the renewable energy sector, and eventually partnered with the Department of Energy in the Solar Ready Vets program. He is a consultant to businesses and government entities on the subject of hiring veterans, developing recruiting, training, fundraising, and placement strategies. He is a social media content creator and podcast host of What's Next Beyond Service, working alongside The Power of Our Story, interviewing prior service members, first responders, and spouses, as well as speaking to the challenges of transition to civilian life and employment. Scott is a keynote speaker on veterans issues and the importance of America and its founding. So, Scott, thank you for being our storyteller tonight.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Sarah. And as you were having folks introduce themselves, the folks that are on the call here earlier, you would ask, folks to do that. And I just want to share real quick that Sarah and I have been connected for about 4 years. We connected on LinkedIn first, and then she told me about what she was doing with this new thing called The Power of Our Story, and never looked back. This has been one of the greatest groups I've ever been connected with, to include our Wednesday morning group. So we can talk about that maybe after I read here. So again, thanks for the introduction. And I'm sure you'll let me know if the connection starts to get bad, then there is one other thing I can do to turn off some of the other items that are in the house that might be, pulling from my internet here. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Well, with that said, so I'm one of 29 authors for the book Wounds to Wisdom, and it's the healing through veteran and first responder narratives. That's the subtitle there. And I'm in chapter 14, and my chapter is labeled Our Second Chances. So here we go. A significant emotional event at the age of 11 put me on the path to not becoming a victim of loss in this life. I recall the moment well. And I'm going to pause real quick because I didn't mean to say this up front. I'm going to probably stop a couple times as I'm reading to maybe add emphasis on something, or maybe bring up something that I didn't put in the book because of restrictions on how many words you could have, and then just maybe not feeling like it was the right thing to put in a book. And if I mention it as I'm reading, it's fair game for when we talk after I'm done reading. So just want you folks to know that. So again, I recall the moment well as I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of my parents arguing. I had never heard this before. Evidently, they argued as a couple, but their quarrels never happened around my brother and me. Excuse me. This was different. As I opened my bedroom door and peeked down the hall into the den, I saw my mom crying while she was ironing my father's Air Force uniform. as my mom verbally pushed back against my dad, which she never did in public, he slapped her on the face. I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart exploded in my chest. I won't go in any further into the painful specifics of what happened moments later, except to say it was truly an out of body experience for me and certainly for my mom. So what happened then? He didn't get violent with her beyond hitting her, which is absolutely a terrible thing. Um, and as I read on, I'll pick back up where it says after receiving a call. The phone rang. This is 2 in the morning, and it was my dad's girlfriend, and they had planned this call. The whole night had been planned. It was a scripted event. And when the phone rang, my dad answered, and he was chipper. He sounded like he was talking to someone who was fantastic. And I'm a 11-year-old, and I'm thinking, what the heck is this? I couldn't imagine what I just saw. But here he's talking to somebody, and it sounded like he was talking to a woman. So I went down into their bedroom because there was another phone in there, and they were back in the den. So I picked up the phone and I listened in on a lot of stuff that I wish I probably wouldn't have never heard. But it is what it is. And she was essentially asking, have you told her yet? Have you done, this, that, and the other? You know, uh, I want to talk to her. I want to tell her that you're mine. You know, and man, I couldn't believe it. It was crazy. So I hung up the phone, went back into my room, and I tried to wake up my brother, who was 4 years older than me. That night, he just happened to he stayed in my room with him that night. We had two twin beds in my bedroom, but that guy can sleep. He was an artilleryman in the army. I could have had a howitzer going off in that room, and he wouldn't have woke up. He just he slept like a rock. So he didn't wake up. So I'm back to trying to listen in on what was happening. So I'm going to pick back up on the reading here. After receiving a call, my dad went into my parents' bedroom to pack his suitcase. At that moment, I mustered up courage to confront him, which my brother and I never did. My dad was a pretty strict guy, that strict but fair kind of thing. I walked into the room and found him feverishly packing his clothing. I asked him what he was doing, why he was packing. He chose to lie and tell me that he had to go on TDY, which is official travel in the Air Force. He didn't realize I had seen his actions. I had listened to the words between him and my mom, and I also listened in on the phone. So he had no clue I heard that whole thing. He also didn't have the courage to tell me the truth. I called him a liar. He noticed my right hand clenched in a fist. He said, "So you want to hit me, huh? Tough guy." As I wiped away the tears, I replied, "I want to knock the crap," but I said the S word. "I want to knock the crap out of you. But I know what will happen if I try." My words and anger caught my dad off guard, and it stopped him in his tracks. I realized I had willfully crossed the line and took the opportunity to quickly retreat to my room, praying that he would not follow me because I knew what would have happened if he did. But thank God that didn't happen. A few minutes later, I heard his footsteps drumming down the hall. Thankfully, he went past my room and out the door, gone forever in so many ways. He died 7 years later at the age of 42. I was a senior in high school at that time. So my dad left when I was 11, and when he died, I was 18. So I was a senior in high school. It was May of my senior year, so there was only a couple of days left of my senior year when he passed. I found out my dad passed away on the evening of my maternal grandfather's birthday. He was a Marine. We were celebrating and just cut the birthday cake, strawberry shortcake, granddaddy's favorite. So my grandfather, being a May baby, we would always have strawberry shortcake with him. So that was a ritual that we always did. Good memories. As the cake was being served, the phone rang. I jumped up and answered it, thinking it was my buddy Bob. We had plans to head out later that evening. The following day was senior skip day. And I don't know whether this is a tradition in other places, but as a senior, when you're coming up on prom, which is usually like a Saturday, Friday in high school for seniors is senior skip day. So you don't go to school, and it's okay. You don't get the truancy officer come by your house if they even have those anymore. So okay, I've been looking forward to this much needed distraction. The call was from my dad's friend at church. The gentleman was very direct and to the point, informing me that my dad had just passed away. An awkward silence followed. I thanked him for the call and hastily hung up. I knew my dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. In fact, he called my brother and me 5 months earlier during the Christmas holiday to inform us that he was terminally ill and had about 5 months to live. My brother was in the Army at the time and was home on leave. This revelation made that Christmas feel somber, and I was glad my brother was home with me and my mom. Hanging up the phone, I proceeded to my bedroom and lost it. It was a brief and painfully quiet cry. And as I'm reading that, I just think back to how gut wrenching that was because I had held a lot of that in. And then it was hard. That was probably one of the most gut wrenching cries I've ever had. Uh, It was a brief and painful, quiet cry, as I didn't want to draw attention to the bad news and ruin my wonderful grandfather's birthday celebration. As things would have it, this was also the evening prior to my senior prom. Ugh. So I put on the false face I had crafted over the years to mask my pain. This mask was a result of many, many notions, the need for self defense mechanism, the necessity to hide my humility of not having a father, and the fact that I felt the obligation to be strong for my mom all of those years in between. So those 7 years that my dad had been gone. I had spent 7 years without a dad. During that time, we had been on government assistance. My mom, a housewife for 17 years, was pushed into the workforce with minimal skills. She suffered greatly in the years that followed because she truly loved my dad. But she became strong. It did not leave my brother and me. She was not a quitter. She loved us. My mom will be 84 in November, and she still loves us. She's one heck of a woman. In those tough, informative years, I learned the value of hard work. I was a fifth grader, picking up a paper route and cutting other people's lawns in the neighborhood. Over the summer, while working for my grandfather, I painted homes. I always had a job. I learned to clean the house, wash my own clothes, and maintain the yard and car. I learned responsibility and self reliance. I also spent many days and nights alone. That was difficult cross to bear, and it was lonely. So my mom was in her mid 30s when my folks broke up, and she was a young gal. And as I said, she struggled. And so, she was going out with her friends, which is fine, trying to find a husband. That was what she thought was going to help her kind of move on. And my brother being older, uh, during those 7 years, he was off doing other stuff. He was towards the end of its high school years. So I spent a lot of time at home in the evenings alone. So, that was, you kind of found yourself, I guess, is a good way to say that. So the silver lining in all that took place was that my dad found God through the forgiveness of Jesus in the last 2 to 3 years of his life. He was truly a changed man, and that would bring me peace on many levels. I discovered that dad did love me and that he was sorry for what he had put us all through. He asked for forgiveness. This lifted a yoke off my shoulders, a heavy one steeped in hatred. And it was absolutely steeped in hatred. A burden that would have steered my life to a very bad outcome. Although many difficulties came as a result of growing up without a dad, I was blessed to have a mom, a brother, and grandparents who loved me. I also had best friends, especially Mark and Bob. By the grace of God, we are still best friends today. Furthermore, there were many key men in my life who helped shape my character. Men like my grandfather, the minister of music at our church, Don Lane, who's deceased now, my high school football coach and track coach, George Versparelli. He's also deceased. I played football and I pole vaulted in track, and he made me the athlete that I was. He was so inspirational. He was just a very good man. And the dads of my two best friends, Cliff and Bob Sr., those were Mark and Bob's dads. These men were role models for me as a young man. To this day, I remain amazed at the wisdom they imparted in me. Life moved forward, and I would go on to college, get married, become a Marine officer, and my wife and I would eventually have two incredible daughters. In my 21 years of active duty military service, I deployed around the world and served in combat operations in Iraq. Through those years, there were Marines and sailors I knew and worked with who lost their lives. Some died in combat, others died during training, and unfortunately, too many died by suicide. In order to keep my wits about me and remain the leader that I was required to be in those moments, and over time, I learned to handle these significant events by compartmentalizing them into buckets. Looking back, I can truly say that God has granted me a sense of serenity and acceptance in coping with loss. When I learned to trust God in all matters, it took the heavy burden off my shoulders. We live our life with free will, yet we are not alone in our struggles as I once thought I was as a young boy. The grace and forgiveness I have found in Jesus has transformed my life and mindset. I learned a remarkable lesson. Don't turn down an invitation to reconnect with a family member once there's been a rift in the relationship. Obviously, if there are questions or concerns for safety, that's quite different. I know for a fact that the forgiveness I found in my dad was laid on my heart from God. Many things had to come together for me to see my dad anew, to give him a second chance. I had sworn off my dad because he deserted me. It was actually because of my grandfather's actions that I gave my dad one more shot. My grandfather convinced me that my dad had changed. Granddaddy, as we all called him, Granddaddy said it was worth my time to spend a week with my dad during Christmas of that year, my senior year in high school. The following Christmas is when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. Remember, my grandfather was my mom's dad. How significant is that? He had keenly felt the pain of betrayal my mother experienced. He saw firsthand his daughter's brokenness. How could he offer sound and loving advice? I was upset with my grandfather for what I felt was bad advice. And I thought that he did not understand my pain. No, he understood all too well. Granddaddy was there helping to put the pieces back together. After all, he survived the Battle of Tarawa during the Second World War. And he shared stories with me about that after I became a Marine, things that he wouldn't talk about to anyone else. He was an incredible man. That Christmas, my dad combined, excuse me, that Christmas with my dad combined with the realization years later that God has a plan forever changed my perspective on our second chances in life and the need for patience, grace, and forgiveness. Made simple, reach out, be willing, and be open. I learned to trust and love others again through my faith in God. He performs miracles. Thank you.
God, that was amazing. Second chances. How did that feel? Let me say goodbye to the recording here, because all those who want to come and join the conversation can actually come join us on the calls. Okay, thanks again, Scott.